What if you found out that the child psychologist you had been seeing for years was never really a psychologist? For some context, I had a really shitty childhood. I don't remember anything from my birth all the way up to 13 years of age. Everything I know about what happened through those years was from a mixture of sparse memories, things my family have told me, and police reports. One of the things I do remember, however, is this lady I called Auntie. I started seeing her when I was 7 years old, sitting in her living room as she typed everything I said down on her laptop. I had no problem with her. I saw her once every month, and she seemed gentle enough that I really thought she was someone I could trust. 7 years later, I admitted to her that I had tried to harm myself on numerous occasions. It was a mixture of multiple different factors: my mother's increasing toxicity, the lack of social interaction at the time, and more importantly, I never moved on from the horrors of my childhood. Now I was 14 years old, and I was able to wonder why these meetings with Auntie never actually seemed to help me. I remember on the way to Auntie's house, I asked my mother if I would ever get the chance to see a different person, maybe get a different sort of help that Auntie clearly couldn't give. I was just hissed at to be quiet. Around that time, the relationship between me and my mother began to crack. My mother became a source of grief for me, and I cried about it during multiple sessions with my auntie. At the end of these sessions, she would try to defend my mother and make it seem like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I tried to come up with my own reasoning at the time and why she was not trying to understand things wholly, and chalked it up to her being empathetic. Maybe being able to explain why my mother was terrible was supposed to help me embrace it in some weird way. And then more things like that seemed to happen. I admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a terrible kid. I went to parties, drank whatever was served, and definitely did not tell anyone what I was doing. But then Auntie started to ask very specific questions, especially about those things. A year later, she started bringing up the parties I've gone to in these sessions without even bothering to hide behind questions. The relationship between me and my mother had almost been completely severed, and the worst part of all this, that at the end of each session, Auntie started bringing my mom into the room to tell her everything I had said. It was terrible hearing my own words against my mother, explaining the increasing abuse that she had begun to put me through, said straight to her face as she sat next to me. My grades in school began to drop. My mother forbade me from going out, and I was completely isolated. So I tried to unalive myself on my 17th birthday. I ran into my mother's room, looking for something that I could overdose with, or something that would push me over the edge. In my crazed state, I just remembered running into her closet and looking through everything. I stumbled upon a suitcase leaning against the wall under the hung-up clothes. I can still imagine it. It didn't look old, so that was probably what made me decide to open it up. When I did, all I saw was a shit ton of papers. The surprise of seeing so much snapped me out of the state I was in, and I recall sitting cross-legged on the floor and wondering what the hell these papers were. After a while of reading, I realized these were the transcripts from Auntie and I's sessions, literally dating all the way back to some of the first sessions I did. I remember feeling sick, feeling so sick, and I at least had enough sense to steal a few of the earlier papers to make it less noticeable. Reading through those transcripts just filled me up with more and more bitter questions, and I decided that night that I would unalive myself after I figured out what was going on. I started to pay more attention to our sessions, looking around her house whenever I got the chance, looking for indicators that could tell me who this psychologist really was. I started asking my mother more and more questions about Auntie. She kept deflecting, repeating the same fact. She was a psychologist. That's until I did something that literally almost ruined the rest of my life. I decided to steal my mother's phone. It seemed like a small thing now, but then it was really life or death. My mother was in the shower, and I had already packed all the stuff needed to be out for a few hours, maybe even for a few nights. As soon as I heard the door lock, I swiped my mother's phone and bolted out the house. I didn't even look down at the damn thing until I was on the bus. I remember looking through my mother's messages first, and I knew I found Auntie when I stumbled across an unfamiliar name. Even better when the messages clearly showed my mother booking appointments. I scrolled up for a while, enough for the bus to get me to a safe place, but even as I walked off the bus, and years of text were read, nothing incriminating had shown itself. I then looked through my mother's call logs, and I saw that she had called this person often, extremely often. I wasn't an idiot. Whatever was really going on was happening on calls instead of messages, which was smart. I'll give credit where credit is due, but it still didn't get me anything. I found a place to sit on the side of the road, and I continued my search. I looked through my mother's social media, and when I tried to search up Auntie's name, nothing came up. I almost gave up. Almost. Every day I thank myself for mindlessly swiping through my mother's followers because I found her. Her account name didn't have her real name, some weird fake one, but when I clicked on her profile, it was most definitely her. She posted photos with some of my mother's friends, and I scrolled for a while down her page until I saw a photo that she had posted of herself and my mother years ago. They had been friends even before I was born. I felt sick, betrayed, and a bit relieved that I now knew what the hell was going on. Why my mother had transcripts, why Auntie didn't think twice before telling my mother every single thing I said, why she defended her. I didn't even bother to find a place to stay that night. I just went back home. I got beat black and blue for doing something that didn't deserve any forgiveness, as my mom said. It didn't hurt at all compared to what I found out earlier that day. All I asked my mother that night is, who is Auntie really? And she couldn't even answer that. A few years later, I was in my first year of university. I had the lucky chance to move out of my mother's house and move in with an old friend who took pity on me and allowed me to stay with him since we applied to the same university. He's one of my best friends now. What finally gave me closure was bittersweet. Clearing out my Instagram, I deleted people I didn't care about or didn't know. My heart dropped when I saw a familiar name in my followers. I didn't think about it at all when I searched up the username in the search bar, and then it came up with Auntie's Facebook account. This psycho had been following me for God knows how long on my Instagram, and suddenly everything that didn't click finally made sense. The unprecise questions, why my mother suddenly decided to isolate me from my friends. It didn't even say psychologist or anything of the sort in her bio. Tell me why it said a chemistry teacher with over 20 years. I admit that I cried like a baby that night, because it had taken years for me to finally understand that two important role models in my life seemed to despise me. Still to this day, I mourn the fact that most of my early adult years are being used to heal from everything in my childhood. Everyone who hears my life story agrees that something was wrong with them. I wish I knew that sooner. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist. Trust me, I did my research. I felt almost ashamed when I blurted out the reason why I'm sitting in this guy's chair. But he just smiled and told me we had a lot of work to do. Yeah, we do. I decided to post about my experience just in the slight chance anyone had a similar experience with therapy, becoming so fucked up, or they feel like they've been living in a hole their entire life. I promise you guys, it gets better, with a little luck and surrounding yourself with the right people at least. Anyways, Auntie, let's not meet again.